All right, let's take a look at global sheep production. When we take a look at sheep production globally, the graph that I have actually shows the sheep density map, the numbers of animals per square kilometer. And the darker areas represent an increased sheep density, more animals per square kilometer than the lighter colored areas. Anything that's gray is really either unsuitable for ruminants or there's no data. And you'll notice it's the extreme arid regions or the northern area around the North Pole and above where there's not a lot of feed. So there's not a lot of sheep. And as we take a look at this, you'll notice that the major sheep producing areas, let's start with countries we know have a lot of sheep, Australia and New Zealand. And you can see that along the coast of Australia, there's a large amount of sheep density. You can see New Zealand off to the little side right there. That is extremely dense in sheep numbers. But then you start looking and you see that China, India, up through the Middle East, up through around the Mediterranean area of Spain and Portugal and that area have quite a few sheep per square per unit of land area. And so globally, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, those all have high sheep densities. You take a look at the US and you'll notice we don't really have that stock density that these other countries do. The sheep industry, we don't have a very dense all-in-one region, and we actually don't have the sheep numbers compared to some of these other countries. When we look specifically at the U.S., we can see that we're spread out a little bit, and we've got two different style production systems. We have the western states, which tends to be a predominant rangeland type system, which we'll talk about. And we have the Midwest and eastern U.S. that tends to be more farm flocks. But when we take a look at this, you do see some natural clustering of areas of sheep production. And so the first is the central area of Texas. Then you see a really dense cluster around the northeastern part of Colorado, where there's actually some feedlots and stuff out in that area. The Intermountain region, particularly in Utah. And then California itself has three distinct clusters. The southernmost cluster is the Imperial Valley. Then we have the Central Valley of California, and then the Dixon area where Superior Farms packing plant happens to be. And on this map, each dot represents 1,000 sheep and lambs. So there's some sparse areas, and then there's some very densely populated areas. When we look at total sheep operations per state, the number of actual sheep farms per state, we see a mix. The first one is Texas. Texas seems to always have the most numbers of anything in a lot of ways. But it's Texas, Arizona, and California. From there, we start to see some of the eastern states and midwestern states intermix with the western U.S. We finish out with Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Mexico, Iowa, Oregon, Wisconsin, and Missouri. So this is the total operations per state. But when we look at where the sheep are actually located and the number of sheep per state, again, Texas is the leader, followed by California. But now, pretty much what we see in the next top 8 to 9 is the western U.S., Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, South Dakota, Montana, Oregon, and then Iowa squeaks in because there's actually a lot of feed in Iowa, and so it's had a pretty strong sheep industry as well. But what we see is no matter where the operations are, the large density of sheep numbers are going to be in the western U.S. From a food product standpoint, if we take a look at what lamb offers, a 3-ounce serving of cooked lean lamb is 47% of the daily allowance for protein for people. And you'll also notice that it provides a lot of vitamin B12, niacin, and riboflavin, 3 water-soluble vitamins that are very important in energy metabolism in humans, as well as a couple of minerals, iron and zinc, which iron is important for blood development and anemia. Zinc is very important in the immune system as well. And so it's a great product, and it actually comes in more appropriate portion sizes than, say, some of our beef or even pork to some extent. Lamb does come in an ideal portion size in a lot of ways. The other aspect that we have is wool production, and wool is an amazing fiber. It can be worn year-round. It's designed to insulate as well as wick away moisture to help with cooling. It's dual purpose that way. It's washable. It is flame retardant and flame resistant, and so it doesn't burn as easily. It's sustainable. It's one of the most sustainable products we can raise out there. It's a great investment. If you were to buy a wool jacket or something, it's going to outlast most of the synthetic products that you have. And it's extremely versatile. Wool can do so many different things. So if we look at the top wool producing states in the United States, it's going to follow where the sheep are at. Texas, California, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. But globally, we know Australia is sheep production, and we know about New Zealand. But did you realize that China is the #2 wool producing country? And what about Russia and Argentina to round out the top 5? An emerging sector of the industry is cheese making and dairy sheep production. This is very prevalent in the Mediterranean countries and increasing in the United States. Sheep milk actually has a high amount of solids and can be frozen and shipped, unlike some other milks. And what's really, if you've ever tried a sheep cheese, they tend to be very smooth and creamy. And I would encourage all of you that if you like cheeses, find a sheep cheese and try it and see what you think of it. But it's an emerging sector. It's a niche market right now. But if it's something that's of interest, the dairy sheep production is a growing segment. In the U.S., we have a couple major production systems. The first two that we talk about are the predominant ones. Range flocks, that's what this is a picture of. Large bands of sheep, and bands of sheep being about 1,000 head, that are somewhat migratory in their grazing behavior up on public lands in the western U.S., and they will migrate to the feed and be moved around to go to the feed. The farm flock, on the other hand, is more intensively managed, not as extensively managed as the range flock, but intensively. Rotational grazing, small acreages, smaller numbers, generally under, like ours has 100 head. But they're going to be supplemental feed. Lambs are going to be pushed to gain faster. A lot of more increased inputs and management and labor in the farm flocks, but also the potential to realize higher profits. Some unique systems, and when we saw that sheep density image, especially in Colorado, there are lamb feedlots. There's one outside of Dixon, and these are where lambs come in for the last maybe 60 days or so and be finished on grain before going to harvest. Sometimes just 30 days. It's just to provide a little bit of fat cover to improve the shelf life of the product, to make a more consistent product for our consumer, and to be able to make a palatable product and get lambs to a comparable weight so that we have that consistency within the marketplace. The last system I want to talk about is one that's unique to California, but a lot of the western states' raised lambs go through this system. Down in the Imperial Valley of California, around El Centro, there is a lot of alfalfa hay production. And during the winter, the fields are fallow and actually need to be cleaned from the previous year's alfalfa harvest. What's a great sustainable way to do that is to bring in sheep, graze the alfalfa fields, and help clean them up, apply nutrients through the urine and feces back into the alfalfa system. And then those lambs, once the alfalfa, we need to start letting it grow for that first cutting in the late winter, early spring. Those lambs will move up to Dixon to Superior Farms to go to harvest. but it is a great system, and lambs do extremely well on this system, and it's a great finishing system. The next video is going to cover talking specifically about the sheep industry in California.